Hi guys, I'm Kristen. Welcome and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a sort of review for Seven Faceless Saints by M.K. Lubb. This was the winner for the Pick My Next Book for the month of August. Every month I give you guys a list of books, all within a particular theme for you to choose from that I will both read and review that month. And in August, the theme was an anticipated release or a new release from the first half of the year that I hadn't gotten to yet. And this was the winner for that selection. The reason why I said that this is a sort of review is that the book did not really work for me and I wound up DNFing it at around the 60% mark. However, I hate kind of like letting you guys pick a book for me that I said I'm going to review and then never coming back to it all. Dark Apprentice, long story. But I also don't want to do, or I don't necessarily shy away from. I'm not afraid to do negative reviews, but I don't want to do a negative review when I feel like it's not really the book's fault. It's more of a combination of just things not being a good fit between me and the book. So what I'm going to do instead is just sort of like explain why this book didn't work for me and my reading habits at this moment in time. And in me exploring that, I will try to say some positives as I go to see if I can find the right reader for this book. But unfortunately, I am not that person at this time. So I'll do a little quick, brief synopsis, sort of what this book is about, what we knew going into, or what I knew going into this book, and that is that it's set in a particular city where the saints have descendants who are gifted with different magical powers. I knew that we were going to have an enemies, or like a friends to enemies to lovers kind of storyline here with our two main characters who we are getting a POV from each, and those are Rosanna, or Roz, and Damien, and they were childhood friends. One of them has magic and one of them doesn't. The one that has it doesn't really want it, and the one that doesn't have it would really have liked it. And then something happened and they kind of lost touch with each other, or started to hate each other. And now there's a series of murders going on within this city, and for reasons they have to team up together to solve the murders, solve the conspiracy, and will they, won't they. The one thing though I would say that I think right out of the gate set this book up for not being a success for me is that it is a YA fantasy. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that the last couple of years YA fantasy has really not been working for me. It's been really few and far between where that has been a success. And that kind of comes down to, it's totally on me for putting this forward as an option. There were a couple YAs on that list, in particular because it was a little bit of a last minute list for August, and it had to do, or in order to read it in August, I also had to have access to it. And because I don't buy books, it was things that had to be available at the library right away or available on Script. So I was a little bit limited in what I was able to give you a selection from. So right out of the gate, this book was kind of going in at a bit of a disadvantage for me reading it at this time because it's a YA fantasy. And nothing against YA fantasy. I went through a huge YA fantasy phase a couple of years back. Really lately, it's just been a matter of kind of like the things that the YA fantasy tends to focus on, whether that is the topic or the theme. Sometimes it's the depth of the world building, the depth of the story, the complicatedness of the world. Sometimes it's the angst, sometimes it's the pining. It could be a variety of reasons, but generally YA hasn't been working for me, and this one was no difference. One quote from a Goodreads reviewer that I wanted to share that I think actually does kind of like describe this book and that I thought was funny was, this book apparently has a stabby bi girl and soft boy who were childhood friends, turned enemies, and then became lovers. And that is actually pretty accurate. If that sounds like the right setup for you, this is definitely a book to check out. This book wanted to be really, really dark fantasy. It wanted, I think, to be a little bit edgy. It didn't quite get there for me. I don't think that it got there for a lot of the readers. I feel like it was dark adjacent, but didn't quite go over the edge. And I'm not sure what the main reason for that was. It just kind of felt like it was missing that, gritty, dark edge, even though there are, some murders and stuff that's happening. And from where I got to, maybe some cult dark magic kind of stuff, but it wasn't oozing with dark atmosphere in the way some other books are. But a lack of edginess would not necessarily kill this book for me, and it didn't. I definitely wasn't necessarily expecting a dark fantasy, even though I have now since seen that in some of the ads or marketing for it. But from here, let's jump into some of the things that actually just didn't quite work for me. One of the things that I will say that I knew was a possibility going in, or I had heard, the only critique that I had heard was about the pining. And as I said, that can work for me, it cannot work for me, and in this case, it didn't. One of the reasons why it didn't work for me is due to the sheer quantity of the pining and the sheer quantity of the on-page word count dedicated to thinking about the other person, their history, what they look like, how they've changed, their possible future together. Takes up a shocking amount of page time. Some of that was weird timing, whether or not they're standing over a dead body, noticing the cut edge of the other person's jawline, or walking to an interrogation where you hear about the, reminiscing about their first kiss from one POV, and then we switch to the other head and we hear about the first kiss from that person's POV. It's just actually a lot of words dedicated to it, and I think it passed over the line, at least for me, of being angsty pining into, okay, we get it. So I would say if you're really, really looking for that element of you want this to be romance forward and then some, then maybe this is going to be a really great fit for you. It just was honestly a lot, even when I knew that that was a thing going into it. Another thing that didn't quite work for me was one of the characters in particular I found just a little bit too annoying, a little bit too hypocritical, and a little bit too into their religion, and not in a way of I read lots of characters who have faith in many, many books. I read a lot of books that explore faith and religion and religious conflict and religious tension and changing relationship with their faith. But this character I found had I guess the way that they thought about their faith, I thought about their religion, bothered me in some of the hypocrisy and in sort of acknowledging that there are flaws and that different people are being treated differently because of this religion, because of some of the religious dogma, but also caring about the plight of those people, but also not caring about how it was being caused or what the root cause of that issue was. This character in particular was also really hypocritical about a particular situation regarding the war, and in a way that was genuine, I think was real. They didn't necessarily notice it, and when they were called out on it, they also didn't really respond well, even though they acknowledged that, oh yes, I guess that is true, but they still firmly held the beliefs that they held, even though they were in the moment of and act and had been breaking those beliefs. They just only believed it for other people. And that really, really rubbed me the wrong way for this particular character. Now, I didn't get past this point, but I do think that on whether or not in the rest of this book or over the course of, I believe it's going to be a duology, so over the course of, the rest of this character's journey, I think that we're probably going to have some coming to grips, some exploration of them and their faith, maybe even just questioning some of the religious dogma at large. I think that there is going to be some growth there. I absolutely think that that is probably part of it. I just really, really struggled with the first version of this character enough that it bothered me that I couldn't keep reading from it. And by from it, I mean from that character's perspective all the time. That kind of bleeds into the theme of the religion here at large. As I said, I read a lot of books. This tends to be a case in a lot of fantasy books where authors will use different worlds to explore different ideas within religious conflict, within faith and religion, and I don't have a problem with that. Where I tend to struggle when religion is a really big focus on the page is with zealous characters. And with unthinking following, I guess, where harm is being done to people, or where people just kind of blindly accept things that don't always make sense. I'm not explaining it. It sounds more it sounds more critical of religion at large than I mean it, but I'm thinking of a particular case I just don't want to spoil for you, where something happened historically, and because they were on one side of this kind of religious schism, their side simply says, this is the way that it is now. And the people that they are, following in this side just accept that that is so, even though they have no actual backing behind the reason for why that would be the case. It's like, oh, well, that saint is fallen now. That saint is no longer really a saint and can't give magic to their descendants, but they have no proof of that or no reason for thinking that. It's just kind of, this broke, and now we said because that saint did that thing, now he's fallen and no more magic from that descendant. But that kind of just seems like something that you said. So it bothered me that seemed to be playing a role here. This one I feel less strongly about because, as I said, I think this is part of the exploration, part of the journey of this duology. It just wasn't being done in a way that I really, really jive with in terms of the exploration of the religious faith here. But if that's something that doesn't bother you at all, and you're willing to wait for that exploration, for that growth, be it in the characters or in social change and those things that you just, that's where this story is going. I just wasn't willing to wait for it based on the experience that I was having while I was reading this moment here. And again, it's not like this is the, a first third setup. We're over the 2/3 point by the time I put this book down. And I just it wasn't the main goal, main priority yet. And I wasn't really, really willing to keep waiting for it. There are a few other small things that I feel like just could be small nitpicking things. I feel like the ones that I have mentioned make up the largest proportion of why it wasn't working for me, and that is impacted by the proportion that each of those things kind of takes over the whole book at large in terms of how much those things were focused on. They were pretty big things, and they were things that really, really bothered me. There were some other smaller things, but there were also some positives as well. Just a couple other nitpicky things that didn't work for me is that there was, sort of a scene that felt really, really unfeasible, that wasn't explained in great detail, where there's sort of one boat catches up to another boat that left hours ahead of it, and there's no explanation on how that boat caught up. There's no explanation on how they actually managed to do what they do in this scene. It all happens quite easily, and it seems like something that it should have been quite difficult. The murder investigation, I would say, was getting some mixed messaging, and on no fault of our characters and no fault of the people doing the investigation, but sort of being told that they must solve those murders, but also not being given any time whatsoever to do so. And please ignore and don't think about any of this evidence over there. So didn't really feel like they were being given a good shot here on even a chance to solve the murder or what was happening. There was some stuff that I felt like was a little bit obvious that then wasn't noticed yet by characters, that I guess was a little bit annoying. But again, just small nitpicky things like that. But those small nitpicking things adding on to the things that already really, really weren't working for me. Some of the things I think that the author did really well, or some of the things that I think were going well in this book, was that I do think it is a really cool world. I do think it is a really interesting religion that is going to be explored. I don't know that we got enough background that I wanted in exploring all of it. Maybe just, I guess we were exploring different elements of it that I didn't enjoy as much, but I do think it was a cool world. I just didn't have a great picture of the world itself at this moment. But again, that's just a division on where we were focusing on the world building into things that I didn't want to necessarily really, really hammer over the head, and not focusing on things that I would have enjoyed exploring a little bit further. But it is a really cool world. I think it was a really cool city, and I do think it had a lot of potential in the religious element as well. I think the characterization was actually really good. Even though I really didn't like the one character, I think that they were a character that made sense as a person. One of our female character, Roz, I think is going to be your classic YA fantasy female of kind of badass main character energy, who has some grief, has some trauma in their history, but is also they're the go-getter, they're the confident main character girl who a little bit no nonsense, a little bit take charge. So I think that actually a lot of people are going to really, really like Roz as a character. I feel like that kind of gives it away, the character that I don't like here. But even with the other character, I think, were still an extremely realistic character. I just didn't like them as a person, even though I think there was some very, very realistic elements to that character. I do think it would be nice to see more actual relationship development between the two characters that isn't based solely on pining and on the shared history that they do have, and more of a sense of, hey, we get together and we work well together and that sort of a thing. Like, I think that there's room for improvement there. But it's not like I didn't want the characters to wind up together. It was just the way that they were pining was a little bit much at times. And I think that there's some room for some of the side characters here to become a little bit more important, to be a little bit more on page, and for those friendships to be further explored or developed as well. I think that there was like a really good foundation of some friend groups here, and I would have loved to see some more of those moving forward. So unfortunately, this book did not work for me. There were just a few things too many, and that took up a large proportion of the book itself that weren't working for me. That doesn't mean that they're not going to work for anyone. And with a lot of the, dark fantasy, edgy, dark murder mystery plot line, I just feel like scale that back a little bit in terms of your expectation, and then you might have a much better experience with this book overall. Get ready for lots of pining, lots of noticing the other person, and if you're in the right mood for that, that can be really fun. So while a lot of my Pick My Next winners have been huge successes for me, this one unfortunately wasn't. But you can have a say in what I read and review in the month of September, so stay tuned later this week. My Pick My Next for the month of September will be coming out, and you can help decide what I read in September and what I review. I post my Pick My Next options at the beginning or right before every month, every new month. So stay tuned for that. You always get to help decide what I read and review. If you have an idea of a theme or topic that you want me to create books as an idea for the Pick My Next for one of the months in the new year, let me know down below. If you've read this book and had similar or different thoughts, I'd love to hear about it, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye.